Hello everyone, this is your friend Naruto Nexus 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is Naruto Secretly Love with Hana, Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. It was sunny afternoon in Konoha and Uzumaki Naruto was training to perfect his new jutsu. After his training in order to master Fuden Chakra, he was now trying to perfect the Rasengan by incorporating Fuden Chakra in it. Meanwhile, Kakashi was reading his precious and inseparable Ika tactics while watching the blonde in front of him, doing what his sensei, the fourth Hokage, failed to accomplish when he created the Rasengan. The fourth Hokage, namely Namikaze Minato, was the sole creator of the spiraling ball. However, few people knew that the Rasengan was an incomplete jutsu. In order to perfect it, the ninja needed to add elemental chakra to it. Just like Kakashi's Chidori, which managed to fuse both chakra manipulation and lightning chakra, the Rasengan, which was known to be the highest form of chakra manipulation, was created to the sole purpose of merging both chakra manipulation and elemental chakra. Since Naruto had a Fuden affinity, he was trying to fuse his element with the Rasengan with the aid of his clones, but failing miserably. Another factor that made possible for Naruto to improve on such technique was Yamato. Since the ex-Anbu has Mokuden abilities, he had the ability of keeping the Kyuubi's chakra from interfering with Naruto's chakra, making his control improve. After several tries, Naruto slightly managed to add Fuden chakra at the Rasengan, adding little sharp blades around the energy ball. Kakashi-sensei, I can only go about this much yet, said Naruto, to which Kakashi stopped reading his book and came to look at the Rasengan, which now looked like a little shuriken was added to it. Looks different, let's test it. I'll do the normal Rasengan and we'll see what this new version does, said Kakashi, before making a normal Rasengan and charged towards Naruto, who in turn charged with his one. After the encounter, smoke came out of both Naruto and Kakashi's hands. However, while Naruto stood still, Kakashi was holding his stomach from the deep cut caused by Naruto's technique. When Kakashi looked at Naruto's back, suddenly the figure of the fourth Hokage with his white robe appeared, making Kakashi's eyes go wide from the implication of such comparison. Naruto, only you can surpass the fourth Hokage. Keep like this and you'll be the one who finish sensei's work, thought Kakashi as he got up and went to congratulate Naruto on adding Fuden chakra to the Rasengan, even though he knew that the technique was far from mastered, being still room for improvement. Congratulations, Naruto. You made it. Although you still need to improve, said Kakashi, smiling to Naruto, who in turn scratched the back of his head and laughed back at Kakashi. Thanks, Kakashi-sensei. Just a little more and I can finally reach Sasuke's level, said Naruto, shooting his arms high, making Kakashi smile in recognition. However, Kakashi wasn't aware of the fact that the blonde's behavior was just a mask to hide his true self. When Naruto was a little boy, he was always mistreated by Konoha's population, just because of what was kept inside his body. However, one time when Naruto was 8, he was being chased by a couple of Chunins. He was terrified at the time, since he didn't know the reason as to why he was chased all the time. Since he couldn't outrun shinobi, the Chunins managed to catch him and started kicking him, while screaming obscenities linked with the word demon. Suddenly, for some reason, Naruto smiled at the Chunin. Even though he was drenched in blood, Naruto genuinely smiled at them, making them stop kicking him and walk away. Because of that, Naruto chose to be this loud and obnoxious attitude of his in hopes that people started acknowledging him as a human being, other than a demon. Even now, after being able to protect himself in case someone decided to attack him, Naruto still chose to behave like an idiot, hiding his true nature. Back to his training, Kakashi was talking about further developing his technique when Izumo arrived at the scene together with Yamato. Upon seeing the pair, Kakashi was suspicious that something bad happened, but he couldn't put himself to figure out. However, he was sure that something really bad happened, from the looks of sadness displayed by both Izumo and Yamato. Suddenly, Yamato broke the sudden silence and delivered the bomb. Sarutobi Asuma is dead, said Yamato, making Kakashi's eyes go wide and Naruto to lose focus on his eyes and start remembering of his interactions with the deceased bearded shinobi. Kakashi, however, demanded to hear what happened, to which Izumo said that his team consisted of Shikamaru, Kotetsu, Asuma and himself faced two Akatsukis and one of them killed Asuma. Upon hearing that, Naruto paled. One of his worst nightmares was that people died because of him, or rather because of what he contains. Right now, Naruto was looking down in shame from hearing about people dying because of him, which didn't go unnoticed by Kakashi, but he decided to let it go, since he figured that Naruto was taking the news just now and had to come in terms with what happened before moving on. Little did Kakashi know that right now Naruto had just dropped his mask. After delivering the news, Izumo left, leaving Kakashi, Yamato and Naruto hanging there looking at the ground. Before Izumo left, he said that the funeral would be at 5 p.m. at Kurenai's apartment. Heading to the red-eyed Kunoichi's apartment, Shikamaru was to carry a message to her. However, he was new at this, since he never brought news such as this before to anyone ever in his life, and not knowing how Kurenai would react, Shikamaru was afraid for who she carried inside her. Asuma told him right before he closed his eyes, that he and Kurenai were expecting a baby together, and depending how she took the news, the baby could be lost as a result. However, he made a promise to Asuma as well as to the Hokage that he would tell Kurenai about what happened. Upon arrival, Shikamaru rang the bell to Kurenai's door before waiting for the Kunoichi to open it. A couples of minutes after and a few more bell ringing courtesy of Shikamaru, Kurenai opened the door only to see Asuma's student with a serious yet down look on his face. Kurenai for her part was having bad feelings about the bearded shinobi, and while in her line of work, death was a common occurrence, she could not admit the fact that Asuma would get killed while on a mission, considering the fact that he happens to be one of Konoha's elite Junins. However, upon seeing Shikamaru looking like that and the fact that he happened to be standing near her door, it could only mean that the issue involved her to some degree. Yes, Shikamaru, said Kurenai before seeing the Chunin raise his face up to eye contact with the brunette, who caught a glimpse of a single tear running down his face, just before he dropped the news that immediately killed her from the inside. Kurenai-sensei. Asuma-sensei is dead, whispered Shikamaru, making Kurenai's pupils lose their focus, and suddenly open tears starts to follow down her cheeks as she throw herself to the ground, screaming for Asuma's name in hopes that the bearded man suddenly appears and envelop her in a hug. Seeing this, Shikamaru kneeled down as to comfort her the best way he could. As Shikamaru heard the girl sob on his shoulder, Shikamaru just closed his eyes, while remembering his interactions with his sensei along the way from his genin exam until the day he died. Shikamaru often beat himself because of not thinking of a way to save his sensei's life. However, being the analytical genius he was, he couldn't think of any solution to it. Not that it mattered anyway, since his sensei's life was now lost. However, as Kurenai stopped crying, his ear caught glimpse of the older girl whispering something. Shikamaru, tell me what happened to my Asuma? Asked Kurenai, to which Shikamaru started relating the story, while looking down. We encountered two members of Akatsuki. After that, our team engaged against them. However, even though we were able to hold them back a little bit, one of the member did some sort of spell using Asuma's blood, therefore transferring all the pain of his body to Asuma's. And without even slight of hesitation, the man known as Hidan took a long dagger and pierced his heart, transferring the blow to Asuma's body, killing him in the process, said Shikamaru before suddenly seeing Kurenai's eyes flash with anger, which made him wonder if the girl would hunt Akatsuki. However, Kurenai wasn't thinking about Akatsuki at all. Well, not directly anyway. The reason she was angry was the reason why those S-ranked missing nins were near Konoha in the first place and then killing her beloved Asuma. She knew who those men were after, and since emotion was clouding her judgment at the moment because of the shock of losing her husband, Kurenai was actually blaming Naruto for the death of the only man she ever loved. Come to think about it, Naruto was the sole reason as to why those monsters came to Fire Country, and therefore he was the cause of Asuma's death. Shikamaru, still oblivious to what Kurenai was thinking, only managed to see her turn her back to him and walk inside her apartment, slowly closing the door and giving him an understanding look, since she knew how Asuma cared for the Nara genius. Upon seeing this, Shikamaru turned and walked away towards his home where he was supposed to get dressed to the funeral. However, he couldn't get himself to attend to the funeral. Therefore, the only place he could go, the place where his memories laid regarding his sensei, was his house's porch where he played shugi with Asuma. At the Nara residence, upon arrival, Shikamaru simply placed the pieces and began playing by himself, oblivious to the fact that his father Nara Shikaku was watching his son since he arrived home. Shikaku was aware of Asuma's death on the hands of Akatsuki and was sad that Shikamaru had to witness his sensei get killed in front of him. However, death was a part of being a shinobi, and therefore Shikamaru needed to come in terms with such facts, since the boy, while smart, was still young in regards to experience. Back to Shikamaru, he just kept playing shugi, while the funeral was taking place at this moment. At the funeral, Naruto, upon becoming aware of someone dying because of him, was deeply hurt. He had swore some time ago in silence that the Kyuubi wouldn't cause any more pain to others ever again and that he would take care of that himself. Now, however, seeing that Asuma-sensei was killed because of the Kyuubi, Naruto was at loss of what to do. Because of his training, he didn't know of Tsunade's mission assignment to all available shinobis in order to search for the Akatsuki, therefore he couldn't stop her from sending others to their death. And now Asuma was dead, and for what? Akatsuki sure won't stop knocking at Konoha's door, and I'm afraid they'll kill even more just to get to me. I can't let this continue. However, before doing what he was sought out to do, Naruto began to scan the funeral for familiar faces. Upon doing this, Naruto saw Tsunade, Shizune, Sakura, of course Asuma's team, however without Shikamaru, which confused the blonde for a minute, but then again Naruto somehow understood the lazy Chunin. Growing up through pain and suffering, Naruto could sympathize with the lazy Chunin. Upon more scanning, Naruto located Konohamaru crying and went there to comfort him by hugging the little genin. At last, Naruto's eyes caught a glimpse of Team 8's Junin sensei carrying a bouquet of roses in memory of Asuma. Upon further look, Naruto realized that Kurenai, even though obviously sad for Asuma, was looking at him as if she wanted to kill the blonde. Naruto knew that look since it pretty much appeared on his life daily. That look came from all Konoha citizens who mistook him from the Kyuubi reincarnated. Nevertheless, this time Naruto looked down, but which was once disappointment and sadness, now was filled with shame and guilt, which didn't get unnoticed by the silver-haired Junin who happened to stand near him together with Yamato. Kakashi for his part was wondering what Naruto was thinking. He saw the look of guilt clearly and was afraid to even think that Naruto would consider himself to blame for what happened with Asuma and Akatsuki. However, Kakashi saw Naruto turn and walk towards Kurenai and now was found suspicious of the blonde's intentions. Naruto for his part, upon seeing the look displayed by Kurenai, turned to walk towards her with a single intention. He knew now that what happened was because of him, and if he wasn't in Konoha or either from the hidden village, no one would have to suffer again. Upon arrival next to Kurenai, he noticed that the glare was intensified, therefore taking away any doubts he had on what he was about to do. Kurenai-san, I feel terribly sorry for what happened to Asuma-sensei. Started Naruto, but was cut off by Kurenai, who chose this time to use Naruto as a scapegoat for all her negative feelings right now. Sorry. You are sorry. If it wasn't for your presence here, none of this would have happened. Konoha would be fine and I'd have Asuma here with me. Now tell me, what part do you say you're sorry about? Screamed Kurenai once again in sobs, earning everyone's attention, including the Hokage, Shizune and the Rookie 9. Upon hearing this, Naruto looked down once again in shame and started talking with a voice that no one has ever heard coming out of the blonde's mouth. You're right, Kurenai-san. It's because of me that Asuma's dead, and it's because of me that Konoha is at risk of attacks, said Naruto, making everyone flinch to hear the once flooded with happiness, sounded like someone who did a wide list of sins throughout his existence. The others were literally taken aback because of Naruto's statement, as was Kurenai, who wasn't counting on Naruto actually taking the blame for what happened to Asuma. Tsunade, Shizune and Sakura were screaming for Naruto to take it back, since he wasn't to blame for something he didn't have any control over. Kakashi looked at the blonde with sadness from seeing Naruto like this, and even more saddened to see Naruto taking the blame because of what's inside of him. However, he couldn't get himself to not look something odd to Naruto's new kind of behavior. From what Kakashi was seeing, Naruto's somewhat serious expression seemed to fit him, as strangely as that sound. Naruto, I know what you're doing, and while I won't dissuade you out of it, you are a grown-up now and responsible for what you chose, thought Kakashi. Kurenai-san, I have a last favor to ask of you. Take this kunai and shove it in my heart. End your and everyone's misery right now, said Naruto, now abandoning his will to live, if it meant to rid the village of Kyuubi's burden, once again scaring everyone to their very core. Kurenai for once took the kunai and started looking at it, and then to Naruto, who by now was with his eyes closed, waiting for the finishing blow. Upon seeing the blonde submitting himself to her wish, Kurenai was in turmoil. She blamed him for what happened to Asuma, and for as most as she wanted to avenge the bearded shinobi, she just couldn't put herself to do it. Therefore, Kurenai threw the kunai on the ground and ran towards her apartment for safety, leaving Naruto to pick the kunai that was to be aimed at his heart and end all the misery. However, Naruto didn't even see the slap that hit his face. While not even carried with chakra, the slap was channeled with sadness and disappointment. When Naruto looked up, he met the eyes of Tsunade, who upon seeing Naruto's eyes, which once was ocean blue, so full of life, now was dark blue, filled with void and dread. Tsunade couldn't bring herself to open her mouth after such interaction. She was going to teach the brat not to waste his life like that. However, upon seeing Naruto's face, Tsunade suddenly couldn't see the Naruto she once knew. Naruto, for his part, seeing that Tsunade wouldn't talk, turned away towards the Hokage monument. He knew that what he did scared a lot of people, but he knew that when he let the mask drop, people would be shocked to see the result of Naruto's real life. Striving for affection once, Naruto put up that mask so that people could see his smile and somehow be kind to him. Now, Naruto needed to take care of some things if he wanted to achieve what he intended to become. While still loyal to Konoha, Naruto felt that his presence inside the village would only destroy it in the long run. At the Hokage monument, after arrival on top of the Yondaime's head, Naruto sat and started looking at his favorite view of the village that was doomed to extinction, in case he chose not to proceed with what he planned to do. Suddenly, a soft gust of wind blew his hair away, and somehow his face expression was at ease. He thanked the heavens for blessing him with a Fudan affinity, simply because he enjoyed its nature. The wind could be calm and peaceful at times, however, without any warning, it could become strong and fearful, destroying everything in its path. However, when Naruto closed his eyes, he immediately regretted, since he felt the damn fox driving him inside his mindscape for a little chat. When Naruto opened his eyes, he came across a wide-grinned Kyuubi, which seemed somewhat amused by the whole situation. So, finally decided to let the mask drop. Huh. Quite interesting, Naruto, although I'm quite surprised with the amount of time it took for you to do it, said the nine-tailed fox, to which Naruto looked down and gave his answer to the fox. I thought that if I kept the mask, people wouldn't get hurt, however, after seeing what happened, there isn't any purpose anymore. Imbecile, your mask never had a purpose. On the contrary, it only made others look down at us. However, now that you realize that on your own, you can grow stronger now. It's time to show them what we're made of. You know what to do, said Kyuubi, before seeing a nod from Naruto. The blonde knew how proud was the fox, and also it unnerved him to see Naruto losing on purpose all the time, simply because he didn't want others to know that he didn't need help in order to defeat his opponents. Now, Naruto knew what he had to do, and that meant getting stronger. Since his ninjutsu affinity was Fuden, he decided to head to the library and copy all Fuden jutsus he could find and learn them. He hoped that as his control over wind improved, the completion of the elemental Rasengan would be much easier to complete. You only wasted your time with that mask of yours. Nevertheless, now that you realized your mistake, it's time for us to train our way. Since you're fused with me, that means you already have an affinity for fire as well. However, you must use my chakra in order to use Kaden attacks. In time, Naruto will manage to unite our affinities, and then everyone will think twice before messing with us, said Kyuubi, earning a nod and a smile from Naruto. Seeing that his presence was no longer required inside his mindscape, Naruto closed his eyes and opened them now to see Konoha from a certain distance. However, he wasn't alone. As he turned his head, he found that a certain silver-haired Junin was there waiting for him while reading his book. I see that you're awake. Had a good night's sleep? Asked Kakashi, hoping to light the mood a little bit, but to no avail. Naruto didn't even twitch his lips, which concerned Kakashi deeply, since he couldn't recognize the blonde. I was talking to an old acquaintance of mine, Kakashi-sensei. Is there something you wish to talk about? Why did you take the blame for Asuma's death? Asked Kakashi out of the blue, since he somehow knew that Naruto wouldn't like having small talk. Naruto for his part knew that he would have to answer the question eventually, and considering that Kakashi rarely used emotion as an argument, he would be perfect to hear his reasons. Asuma died because of me, plain and simple. My presence here made Akatsuki chase me here. So it's only logical that I'm to blame for their presence here, therefore blamed for Asuma's death, said Naruto with a motionless voice, only pure rationality, which made Kakashi look at his eyes for a few moments, as a way to gauge any hint of emotions. However, even with his wide experience at looking at the underneath of situations, in this case he was having trouble deciphering. So what's next now? Are you going to leave? Asked Kakashi after he stopped trying to access the situation. Yes, answered Naruto, making Kakashi look down again at another one of his students who chose to defect the village. However, his thoughts were cut short, since Naruto wasn't quite finished. And before you wonder if I'm doing the same thing as Sasuke, don't. I'm loyal to Konoha, however I can't stay within these walls. Well, you're a smart guy, you'll figure out, said Naruto, lifting and turned back to back with his sensei, who by this time already knew what Naruto intended to do. You want to become a hunter nin, aren't you? Asked Kakashi, though it was more like a statement than a question. You're not strong enough to fend for yourself, stated Kakashi, using his last resort to convince him to stay, however to no avail since the blonde's mind was already settled. That's for me to worry about. Not you, said Naruto before vanishing within a swirl of leaves, leaving Kakashi alone on top of his sensei's head. Minato-sensei, he is as stubborn as I was, isn't he? With Naruto. After leaving the monument, Naruto went towards the place he knew where all of the techniques would be located. Already packed with a couple of scrolls in order to copy all the Fuden ninjutsu and its theories, Naruto stopped right in front of the library. When he entered, he proceeded to look at the many shelves that happened to be packed with books and scrolls. After a while, he reached a roll with the word ninjutsu in it and went along the roll in order to find the Fuden section. Upon arrival, he came across the Fuden section, slightly disappointed to see that compared to other elements, Fuden was the least popular area of the library. Still, he thought that would at least a dozen Fuden jutsus for him to use. Of course, Naruto intended to learn Kaden ninjutsu as well, but since Kyuubi told him that it would teach him later on, he decided to focus entirely on Fuden. Quickly picking the scrolls, He positioned them on top of the tables near him and proceeded to copy all of them. As he passed through the named, he recognized the one called Fuden Datapa, Wind Style, Great Breakthrough Jutsu, that the snake used on his team at the Chunin exams. After writing a bit, he came in contact with another familiar one called Fuden K's no Yeba, Wind Style, Wind Sword Jutsu. He remembered hearing something about Hayate's wound being caused by a sword made of wind. After a while, he copied all of the Fuden Jutsus, using the entire scrolls he had at his disposal. Wrapping it up, Naruto left the library carrying with him the scrolls with the information he gathered with Fuden Ninjutsu. Calmly, he went home and went straight to bed, since he knew that tomorrow would be the day that he voiced his request to the Hokage and he was sure she would protest immensely. The next day, one day later, Naruto woke up and immediately dressed up. He knew that Tsunade would begrudge him after his request, so he wanted to take care of it as soon as possible. However, he needed to do something else first. Even though he didn't quite agree with Kakashi's assessment of his abilities, Naruto knew that he would face eventually A and S ranked missing nins, because of his chosen profession. So he needed to up his physical training as well. Being proficient in taijutsu was good enough, however the nine-tailed fox told him to purchase a katana, since Kyuubi wanted to teach him some ancient kenjutsu style that was used by a strong samurai nearly 500 years ago. Therefore, he picked some cash that he kept inside his apartment from not trusting the bank and left his apartment towards a weapons shop he knew about that was located near his home. Upon walking, he noticed people staring at him like they were waiting for him to show his wide smile or something peculiar to his usual behavior. As people passed through him, he was more and more thinking that the damn fox was right and even cursing the fact that because of their link, the fox could hear his thoughts as well, making the beast laugh his off, unnerving Naruto a little bit. At the weapons shop, after a while between walking and having to hear Kyuubi's way of saying, "I told you so," inside his head, more like laughing at him for being right the entire time. He gauged the place from outside a little bit and shrugged it off since he didn't care for appearance. In fact, he knew that appearances were what made his life a living hell in the first place. As he entered, he was astonished to see that the store could easily fill an army. Tons of different types of swords, kunai, exploding tags, shurikens and clothes. Naruto was at loss of words right now, however his attention was diverted when an old man made his presence known with a little throat clearance. "Welcome customer, can I get you anything?" asked the old man, to which Naruto turned to study the man a little bit. The blonde was suspicious of the fact that the man was treating him like a normal customer, since it was clear that he knew what Naruto has inside of him. However, the old man was just looking at him like expecting a request soon, so Naruto just shrugged it off for later and turned to give him the list. "Hi, I'm looking for a set of training weights of 20 pounds each, 2 sets of kunai and shurikens and a katana," said Naruto, earning a surprised look from the old man. "A katana, you say? Are you a ninja? I've never seen any shinobi wanting to purchase a katana. Not that I agree with those bastards, always preferring speed over force. However, I need to know what style do you intend to use, before I pick the right one for you," said the old man, to which Naruto nodded and asked Kyuubi the name of the style. "Right, the name is Huka Yakushin, Fire Dash, but I don't know if you're familiar with," said Naruto, but stopped after seeing the man's eyes literally go out of his sockets just from hearing the name of the style. "Is there something wrong?" asked Naruto, making the old man recover his concentration and go to the back of the shop. "You wait right here, I have the perfect one for you," said the old man, getting a nod from the blonde who by now was asking questions to the fox. "What was that all about?" said Naruto, only for Kyuubi to hear. The man was astonished simply because of such an ancient kenjutsu style. "If I would guess, I'd say the man has a lot of knowledge regarding kenjutsu. This style will be perfect for you, since it uses the strength of the user not only offensive but defensive as well. With this style, you'll be able to defend attacks and disorient the attacker. However, before you start learning, you need to enhance your muscles, hence why you'll be using the weights at all times, explained Kyuubi, to which Naruto nodded when suddenly the old man appeared with a katana on his hands. Upon inspection, he realized that the sword was quite heavy, being therefore perfect for what Kyuubi intended for him to learn. As you manage to feel, this sword is pretty heavy. Your style focus on powerful hits, so this katana will be perfect for you. However, in order to be well used in battle, you have to be more bulky than you are now, but since you'll be purchasing weights, I see that you already know that. Now, I gathered everything you requested, said the old man before telling the price from the purchase, to which Naruto gladly bought. Thanks for everything, said Naruto, to which the old man shrugged it off. Don't mention it, it's rather rare for shinobi to acquire katanas, it'd my pleasure if you would bring her here once in a while for repair and treatment, said the old man, earning a question mark from Naruto. Her. Ha ha ha, sorry about that, I forgot to mention the sword's name. You see, every sword has a name since a sword is like an extension of the user's body. This one is called Frasere, free spirit, said the old man, receiving a nod as well as a smile from Naruto, who in turn liked such a name. I like that. What's your name, son? I'd like to know the name of a customer who shares the same view as I do concerning katanas. Asked the old man, to which Naruto quickly responded by saying his name and waiting for him to say his own. Nice to meet you, Uzumaki Naruto. My name is Higurashi Akido, said the old man. After a while, Naruto said goodbye to the old man and returned home with the things he purchased, wondering where he knew that name from. I don't know Tenten's last name, so I put this one. Once he arrived home, he quickly placed it on his couch and left again towards the Hokage's office. On the way, Naruto was thinking of what Tsunade would say to him once he came with the news. The only one he ever told was Kakashi, and Naruto couldn't know if the lazy Junin reported to the Hokage or not. Still seemed odd that he would be the one to appear and demonstrate concern to the blonde. Perhaps the old hag sent him there in order to scout for some information as to why he did what he did. As Naruto walked, he also noticed that no one of his friends, if Naruto could say something like that, appeared to talk to him after what he did. He, however, shrugged it off, seeing that actually it was for the best. He knew that Akatsuki wouldn't stop for nothing to get a hold of what's inside of him, and that easily meant that they would kill everyone in Konoha if that was necessary to take Naruto with them. This way, Naruto wouldn't have to worry about seeing another one being killed by Akatsuki. Meanwhile, at Tsunade's office. Inside Tsunade's office, Kakashi and Jiraiya was there talking about what the blonde told to Kakashi yesterday. The idea of transforming Naruto into a hunter nin not only seemed absurd, but also it would be like handing him on a silver platter to Akatsuki. Tsunade, however, was remembering Naruto's face expression yesterday, and it shocked her to very core. The idea of someone like Naruto literally give up on life was, safe to say, unimaginable. However, Tsunade wasn't blind to the fact that ninjas creates mask as a way to cope with all the pain and sufferings they've been through, and to think that Naruto wore such a mask would break her heart. She always adored the boy, even though he somehow always got to her nerves. Naruto was to Tsunade what Nawaki was when he was alive. Tsunade viewed Naruto as an annoying younger brother, and seeing him in such a state, it hurt her chest a lot. Right now, Jiraiya was finding hard to believe that Naruto would behave like this, and even if he had a mask, he knew that Naruto would always be Naruto, just with a little changes, that's all. He as well was against the idea of turning to hunter nin duty away from the village, since he knew that Akatsuki had some spies here in Konoha and it would be easy to know the Kyuubi's whereabouts. Kakashi for his part didn't voice an opinion on that matter. He was simply here to tell them what Naruto told him and be on his way. He wouldn't like for Naruto to know that he broke his trust and ran to tell the Godime Hokage. However, Kakashi's plan went down the toilet when a knock was heard on the door. Slowly getting inside with his hands inside his pockets, Naruto entered and gauged the ones present with the Hokage. He saw Kakashi there, which could mean that they already know what he planned to do, and there was Jiraiya. Speaking of the Toad Hermit, he was eyeing Naruto's face expression and found it peculiarly odd that the boy so far didn't show one single smile on his face, not even a twitch from his lips. Naruto's eyes were dark blue, quite different from the deep ocean blue ones that everyone seemed to be entranced with. Another different aspect was that Naruto chose to knock on the door before coming in, when before he would just barge it in and make his presence known. Tsunade looked at him and was sad to see that Naruto was still showing that look. That look that was only present when a person comes in terms with his haunted past and no longer tries to avoid it. And suddenly a realization dwelled inside her head: Naruto had acknowledged the Kyuubi. It was the only way he would take the blame for Asuma's death like that. Nevertheless, she needed to hear how he would address her so she could see if he still had hopes of snapping out of however trance he is on that made him think he was the nine-tailed fox. "What do you want, brat?" asked Tsunade, to which Jiraiya and Kakashi shifted their gaze towards what Naruto would say. "Hokage-sama, I have a request to make," said Naruto, making Tsunade look down once again and the others look at their Hokage with sympathy, since even though she always told him to address her with respect, inside she always smiled when Naruto called her Bachan. Both of them knew how Naruto and Tsunade were close to each other, and seeing Naruto treat her like that was one of the deepest blows she received since Dan and Naoki's death. "And what request would that be?" asked Tsunade, still looking down, trying to hold her tears from falling. "Even though I suspect that you're already aware, since Kakashi is here. I wish to become a hunter nin," said Naruto, making the lazy Junin snap at him so quickly, Kakashi himself thought he almost broke his neck. Even though Kakashi did tell them about Naruto's request beforehand, he wasn't expecting for the blonde to be suspicious of him like that. A part of him was deeply hurt that his student wouldn't trust him, however the other part sighed since Naruto was right to be suspicious of him. Nevertheless, Tsunade lifted her face to address who was now simply one of her genin requesting for a hunter nin position. "Why would you want to become a hunter nin, Naruto?" asked the Hokage, to which the blonde asked right away. "A couple of reasons, actually. First, Akatsuki is looking for me and they will do anything to get to me, therefore with me out of the village, they wouldn't come here. Second, I believe Konoha would be a better place without the demon walking around," said Naruto, however with little to no emotion, which made Jiraiya flinch after hearing the boy's somewhat icy tone, even more after considering himself the demon. Seeing Tsunade not even trying to convince Naruto to stay, Jiraiya moved to the Akatsuki argument. "Naruto, think about what you want. If Akatsuki knows that you're out of the village, they'll come for you. You're not ready yet to face them on your own. Also, how long do you think it'll last before they know that you became a hunter nin?" asked Jiraiya, using it more as a statement than a question. However, Naruto interpreted as a question and proceeded to relate his plan. "Well, Jiraiya-sama," Jiraiya flinched from the sudden respect coming from the boy, "if you must know, I've that already covered. First of all, I would request 2-month training in order to perfect mine and Kyuubi's affinities and then proceed to hunter nin duty. Now regarding the information leaking, my plan is to give me a codename and hide the file deep within the Hokage's desk or even vault if necessary. With my identity being regarded as sheet death, no one will know that it would be me and therefore no one will know of where I am," said Naruto before seeing everyone gasp upon hearing Naruto's plan. All of them were impressed of Naruto's strategy and all of them realized that if they followed Naruto's plan, no one would sneak on the Hokage's office just to see Naruto's hunter nin identity. However, while his plan was ingenious to say the least, both Jiraiya and Tsunade suddenly remembered that they have to dissuade him of what he plans to do. "Naruto, think about this. What about your friends? They would be devastated to see you leave like this," said Tsunade. "What's the point of hiding my identity, if I were to tell anyone else about it? The less they know about me, the better. Asuma's death awoke me to see that the longer I stay in Konoha, more people will be killed by Akatsuki, and therefore I plan to serve Konoha outside its borders while training to exhaustion and eliminate them for good, said Naruto, gaining understanding nods from everyone present in the room that happened to agree that if Naruto were to be a hunter nin and also hide his identity, the less people who knew about it, the best. However, there still remained the fact that the rookie 9 would ask questions about him, and Tsunade very well knew about that. Very well, Naruto. I see that your mind is set up for this. I will not dissuade you out of it. I'll also grant you 2 months of training, and then I'll be sending your mask and an updated copy of our bingo book. Now, one more thing I should ask, since you pretty much thought of everything. What should I tell in case anyone asks about you? What should I say? Asked Tsunade, to which Naruto turned to think a little bit. He wasn't considering that situation, however he didn't have much to think about it, since he had the perfect idea. I doubt that anyone will ask about my whereabouts, so keep throwing solo missions for me. Tell them Jiraiya here is training me in information gathering, and tell them I'm meeting his spying network and introducing myself to them, explained Naruto, to which Jiraiya laughed a little bit, since he would eventually send the blonde to meet his spy network in the future. How long have you been planning all of this, Naruto? How the hell could you believe that it would be best for you to leave? Huh? Screamed Tsunade, at loss of what she should do, since Naruto had beaten all their arguments like they weren't worth even mentioning. What can I say? 2 heads think better than 1, I guess. Now that I have clearance to do what I requested, I shall leave you be, Hokage-sama, said Naruto before turning and leaving through the door while all the people present were staring at his back. After he closed the door, Tsunade scowled him for deliberately betting his life like that, to which Jiraiya sighed, seeing that in fact this Naruto wasn't the Naruto he came to know. Also, Jiraiya was wondering about some of Naruto's words. He mentioned about mastering his and Kyuubi's affinity, which was odd considering that not only Jiraiya didn't teach him elemental ninjutsu, but also nobody knew what Kyuubi's affinity was. Also, he said that 2 minds think better than 1, so that must mean that the Kyuubi is aiding him in this quest. Jiraiya now was at loss on what to think of this situation, however he would be a fool if he would sit around and miss Naruto and Kyuubi's idea of training. With Naruto now walking straight to his apartment in order to study the theory behind the jutsus, Naruto started to ponder about his interaction with Tsunade and Jiraiya in regards to becoming a hunter nin. He actually felt it went well, despite the fact that Tsunade was visibly angry at him for requesting such a thing. Underestimation is one of the main reasons a powerful opponent loses his battle, said Kyuubi, pretty much answering Naruto's hidden questioning. Yeah, look what happened to you, after you underestimated the 4th Hokage, said Naruto, playing the with almighty fox, who by this time stopped trying to put some sense into Naruto's head about such a lousy mistake he made 15 years ago. Quit trying to mock me, I'm serious. They underestimate your potential, therefore they think that we'll get killed easily, said Kyuubi, to which Naruto nodded. Naruto's interaction with Kyuubi improved after 6 months of Jiraiya's training trip. The beast at the time said that since their bodies were linked to each other for life, that they should work together to stay alive, on Naruto's part, and satisfy Kyuubi's bloodlust ever once in a while. Actually, the hunter nin situation pleased the beast greatly, since hunter nins were supposed to kill missing nins and bring any sort of proof to their kill, like the enemy's hand or a very rare possession of his, in order to identify his death. Well, first phase of the plan is in action, said Naruto, to which Kyuubi nodded. Indeed. After Naruto entered his apartment, he left the scrolls and his sword on the table and went towards the kitchen to fix a bowl of instant ramen. No matter how much Naruto changed, ramen was simply his favorite meal, period. One time, the fox warned him to eat healthy stuff like some vegetables and scowled Naruto pretty much every time. What few people knew was that the fox was also responsible for the blonde's high metabolism, therefore when Naruto used to eat up to 16 bowls of Ichiraku ramen, everyone seemed to ask where the food would go. While the noodles were being prepared, Naruto stood next to it, waiting eagerly to eat the food from heaven, as he liked to call on occasions. 3 minutes later, the instant ramen was ready and he fixed the table for dinner. Looking across the table, he saw an empty chair and sighed. Still today he never even remembered why the hell he thought of buying a pair of chairs for his table. Naruto grew up alone his entire life, and while his academy sensei Iruka was rather close to the blonde, they only met at Ichiraku's or at the academy. Furthermore, even his genin team didn't visit him once. So why bother, he thought. After eating all the noodles and receiving some killing intent or a courtesy of a very pissed fox, Naruto turned to study the sword a little bit. He could see that it was well taken care of from seeing how the steel managed to reflect the lamplight with perfection. The grip was simple, all black. In fact, Naruto never once considered personalizing the katana to suit his style, simply because he couldn't think of any symbol to put. As he yielded it off the holster, Naruto had to force his arms in order to move the sword around, simply because it was so damn heavy to move with it. The heavier it is, the better it goes for training. Not only will help your kenjutsu style, but also improve your muscle mass. Sometimes, you have to rely on physical abilities in order to win a fight, therefore you are going to train your body to the ground, and while you do that, your clones will be learning Fuden ninjutsu from the scroll and Kaden ninjutsu from me, said Kyuubi, to which Naruto nodded his consent and then put the sword back in the holster. Speaking of jutsus, we're going to be up all night, reading all this information. In that case, I'll be fixing a bowl of, said Naruto, but was interrupted by the sudden yell from Kyuubi, who threatened Naruto that if he were to eat another bowl of ramen today, that he would throw everything up. Needless to say, Naruto stopped thinking about the noodles, since he didn't like the idea of throwing ramen away. Okay, damn it, I won't eat ramen tonight, mumbled Naruto, earning a satisfactory sigh from the fox. After the little interaction, Naruto started reading the first scroll, which made an introduction to Fuden ninjutsu. Upon reading, he realized that Fuden techniques were divided into two categories: sharpening the wind of cutting and slashing, or enhancing the strength and speed of the wind, which meant that he would need to practically master both of them. Well, more like the second one, since Naruto already knew who to cut using Fuden chakra from Kakashi and Yamato's training before. Therefore, he kept reading line after line with great interest. By tomorrow this time, Naruto hoped to understand the technique's concepts and just make the clones practice the technique. Kyuubi said that on the first month his clones would only be learning Fuden ninjutsu, and the second one, they will be learning Kaden. While the clones are doing ninjutsu, the real Naruto would do physical exercises, incorporating taijutsu, kenjutsu and bodybuilding workouts. 2 hours later, Naruto still didn't finish reading, but from the looks of it, he wasn't even worrying about a night's sleep, from being so immersed in mastering all the Fuden jutsus and possibly the Kaden jutsus in the future. He grinned at the prospect of fusing his techniques with Kyuubi's, simply because of how the wind affects Kaden techniques. After another hour, Naruto managed to finish the scrolls, which he was proud to have been able to memorize the theory. Great, now to practice, thought Naruto, to which Kyuubi snorted at the boy's naivety. I hope you aren't thinking of being able to master all of them tomorrow, are you? 'Cause that would be the most stupid thing you've ever said, laughed Kyuubi, earning a scowl from the blonde. No, of course not, although I'm already able to use Fuden chakra, I'm not even close to doing a single Fuden jutsu yet. Do not worry, Fox, if it's one thing I'm not, is being a genius. I just hope that at least I can manage to learn all of them in a week or two, so that the rest, I can practice doing it and hopefully master, said Naruto, earning a nod in recognition from the fox. Good, now training tomorrow will be tough on you. So I suggest that you rest a little so that you don't complain at me tomorrow, said Kyuubi, to which Naruto just ignored and went to sleep. The next day, as the sunlight engulfed Naruto's apartment, he opened his eyes and got off his bed. Walking slowly towards the little balcony of his apartment, he turned to look at the rather pleasant view of Konoha and the Hokage monument. However, His eyes were as always focused on a certain point, which was the fourth Hokage's head. For some unknown reason, Naruto always looked at the Yondaime Hokage's head, and because of this, he began wondering what would happen if the man was still amongst the living. It was an A-ranked secret in Konohagakure that the fox wasn't defeated by the Yondaime. Instead, he trapped the demon inside an infant at the time by the name of Naruto. As he closed his eyes, he was suddenly even more relaxed after a soft gust of wind came washing all of his worries and simply transformed them into nothing. For a moment, then, Naruto felt like he could do this all his life. It seemed quite logical that Naruto liked the air breeze, seeing which his elemental affinity is. After a while, he went back inside the apartment and began to change. Quickly going through the necessities, he grabbed the scrolls, the sword and the weights and left the place straight to the furthest training ground there was. Training ground number 43, being next to the Forest of Death, would be perfect for Naruto to train without being interrupted by someone wanting revenge or one of the rookie 9 asking questions about his action at Asuma's funeral. It was not that he regretted saying what he did, far from it actually. The acknowledgement of being the one who shared the body with Konoha's worst enemy did have its setbacks, and sometimes being the population's scapegoat wasn't easy in the slightest. Constantly having to deal with hate, stares and anger, Naruto grew accustomed to all of this and more. However, he had only 2 months to train and then he was back to active duty as a hunter nin for Konohagakure. As he jumped rooftops, he wondered how much his life would change from now on. First of all, his missions would be all the same, tracking missing nins and exterminate them. However, Naruto knew that outside of Orochimaru and Itachi, there is many powerful missing nins as well. Another thing will be not seeing the ones who grew up together and their respective junins, well, the living ones at least. He doubted Kurenai would ever approach him in the future, and the fact was that he was fine with it. At last, those whom were considered family to him, named Jiraiya, Tsunade, Iruka and Kakashi, would be safe at least from Akatsuki's hands. Just thinking about Asuma's death once again, made his blood boil in frustration. He sometimes wondered if maybe he wasn't even supposed to stay in the village after he had knowledge of the fox, but then again a lot of things would never happen. First of all, his team wouldn't be sent to face Zabuza, since it was him that kept pestering the Hokage for a better mission, and Sarutobi granted that wish. Also, Sasuke wouldn't be jealous of Naruto's growth. Nonetheless, Naruto dismissed the part of Sasuke not being jealous, since he pretty much knew that at the first promise of power, the Emo Uchiha would demand more and more power, eventually going to Orochimaru for guidance. And the best thing, he wouldn't have to constantly scream for attention, since he wouldn't feel the need for it anymore, since he would be outside the village. Quickly shrugging it off, since dwelling on the past would be pointless. Also, the fox couldn't help but add his commentary to the idea. It's nice to admit that you sucked back then. You have a cunning ability in embarrassing my presence to very core with how poorly your abilities were, said the proud demon, to which Naruto scowled the fox, because of his goddamn mask of attention. Training ground number 43. When he arrived at the aforementioned training ground, Naruto studied its size so as to establish the number of clones to use. The size was equivalent to the one he used to begin his Fudan training, therefore 200 clones would be the number of choice. Slowly moving his arms to form the correspondent hand seal, he molded the necessary chakra, and instantly the area was covered by a white smoke, appearing the 200 Naruto clones. Okay, then, listen up. You all have memories of the Fudan jutsus that we need to practice. Therefore, since there is 200 of me and 12 techniques to master, we'll be doing the following. We'll divide in 13 groups. The first 12 will be consisted of 10 clones each and train one Fudan technique. The 13th group will practice chakra control, said the real Naruto, earning mumbles from his clones which appeared to have a mind of their own at times. Suddenly, one of the clones turned to ask a question. And while we train our off, what are you going to do? Asked the clone, to which the real Naruto sighed. Since he learned the technique, he unconsciously developed the technique up to transfer the real one's conscious to the clones, therefore making them questioning the orders of the real one. For me is physical training. I'll be adding 20 pounds to both arms and legs. We'll be doing this for the equivalence of a week. Now let's get to work, ordered the real Naruto, earning screams of recognition from the clones. After seeing the clones divide into groups, the real one added the weights to his limbs and began running exercises around the area. At the Hokage's office, while Naruto was training towards his goal, Tsunade was rubbing her temples because of the headache she was experiencing right now. Because of Naruto's resolve yesterday, the blonde Hokage decided to release the tension by drinking a little bit. Sadly, what first became a few drinks, at the end of the night, she already drank 2 bottles of sake. Therefore, it was safe to say that hangover was tormenting her at the moment. Not only that, but right now she was in front of Sakura, Sai and Kakashi explaining to them that Naruto would not be a part of team anymore. Tsunade-sama, what do you mean Naruto is no longer part of Team 7? Asked Sakura, clearly concerned for the blonde. As I'm trying to say, Sakura, along his training trip, Jiraiya trained Naruto in information gathering. Now the next step for him is to meet the pervert's spying network, in case something happens to Jiraiya and they try to contact someone from the Leaf, said Tsunade, to which Sakura looked down in sadness from Naruto's sudden mission. Even though Sakura was a strong person on the outside, inside she was just as fragile. She blamed herself from Sasuke's defection to Sound, and now Naruto is to be trained to replace Jiraiya in the future. Kakashi knew his student and also knew that she would be even more depressed if she knew the real truth. However, Kakashi kind of understood Naruto's reasoning for doing this. Whether he is to be blamed for Asuma's death or not, it was safe to say that Akatsuki wouldn't stop for nothing in order to get their hands on him, which meant that they would be using the life of others just for information of his whereabouts. However, what Kakashi was really wondering was how insightful his blonde student was to realize this and act upon it. Sai, the 4th member, now turned 3rd, was impassive as always. Being trained en route made him behave more like a weapon. Deprived from emotions, Sai grew up as just a weapon for Konoha and nothing else. However, when he met Sakura and Naruto, he started changing his behavior, much to the point of requesting to be permanently assigned to Team 7. Now, here he was hearing the Hokage's explanation of Naruto's sudden mission, and truth be told, he didn't believe it at least one bit. He knew Naruto to be unpredictable from time to time, so he was inclined to believe that everything concerning the blonde would be more complicated than it looked. Nevertheless, Sai wasn't much of a meddler in people's affairs, so let it be for the moment. Returning to the issue in hand, Sakura was coming into terms of what will happen from now on, much to Tsunade's happiness, since she didn't feel like revolving around this certain topic, concerning her blonde little brother. Now, Team 7, you have a B-ranked mission close to Suna. The Cage requested some help in dealing with some troublemakers that are attacking some merchants. You are scheduled to leave in 2 hours, so gather everything and head up there. The Cage informed us that one of their Junins will be meeting your team close to the border between the 2 countries, said Tsunade, to which the team accepted and left. With Team 10, Shikamaru, Choji and Ino were now having lunch at the barbecue place, in memory of their dead sensei. Choji was barely touching the food, demonstrating how sad he was. Shikamaru and Ino were discussing about the future of Team 10, now that their sensei was gone. Shikamaru was relating that one must be able to apply for Junin very quickly so that the team could continue to be together. Both of them knew that the Hokage would distribute the now incomplete team around or set them up with a different Junin to be captain. Shikamaru, there is something troubling me about what happened at the funeral. Since you weren't there, for Kami knows why, there was a discussion between Kurenai-san and Naruto, said Ino, perking Shikamaru's interest right away. Ever since Asuma died, Shikamaru vowed to protect the family that he left behind, meaning Kurenai and the yet-to-be-born infant. Ino, for her part, upon seeing that the Nara was interested, turned to explain what happened. Along the explanation, Shikamaru's eyes were getting wider and wider, as if it was even possible after some time. However, when he heard that Kurenai called Naruto a demon and Naruto took the blame for his sensei dying, he was speechless to say the least. Shikamaru was considered to have a IQ of more than 200, however no matter how much he tried, he couldn't figure out the reason as to the two's sudden behavior. Resolving on investigating it after lunch or even asking the blonde genin, he shrugged the topic off for now. At the library, after saying goodbye to his peers from Team 10, Shikamaru headed to the library so as to try if he could find something pertaining Naruto and why Kurenai called him a demon in the first place. Quietly moving through the library's shelves, since he practically memorized them, Shikamaru went straight for the history section. He thought that if he could see what happened during the time of Naruto's date of birth until today, he could get the answer that he was looking for. Upon looking at the shelves, Shikamaru found the history book of Konoha. Inside there was all the facts that occurred in Konoha from the date of the village's foundation until today. Since Naruto was his age, of course, he flipped directly to the date when Yondaime was instated as Hokage of the village and go forward from there. As he flipped through the pages, he saw Konoha's victory on the last shinobi war against Iwa, courtesy of the Yondaime's Rasengan and Hiraishin no Jutsu. No matter how much people said, Shikamaru couldn't possibly believe that a single man was responsible for winning a war, no matter how strong the guy was. Furthermore, Shikamaru focused on the part when Yondaime managed to beat the nine-tailed fox Kyuubi no Yoko at the cost of his life. As he was reading the story, he came upon the specific paragraph. Tsunamis and earthquakes being caused by a simple wave of its tail, the Kyuubi no Yoko was an immensely powerful demon that descended upon Konoha. After consecutive attacks from Konoha's elite shinobis, it still wasn't enough to overcome the demon that somehow chose to bring his wrath to Konoha. It took our strongest shinobi, Namikaze Minato, the instated Yondaime Hokage, to use all his power to defeat the almighty demon, however not without the cost of his own life. After the monster's defeat, Konoha was divided among happiness and terrible misery, happiness because of the demon's defeat but sadness from the loss of Konoha's strongest Hokage. After reading it another time, Shikamaru felt a sudden appreciation for what the Yondaime Hokage did for the village. Because of him, his family and friends was able to live in peace. Quickly dismissing such an event, Shikamaru sighed since other than this incident and the Sand Sound invasion, nothing much happened, therefore, he couldn't find anything related to Naruto at all. So why, Kurenai, one of Konoha's Junin, would call Naruto a demon, he thought. Shikamaru wasn't dumb to know that certain events, depending on its importance, wouldn't be listed in books for the public to read. Therefore, he assumed that the blonde was a part of an A-ranked secret to which only Junin and above would have access to. Taking this thought into consideration, Shikamaru flipped the book to the Kyuubi part once again, since the word demon would only be associated with the Kyuubi. Looking at the monster's photo, he began to compare the fox with Naruto, trying to find at least something. However, other than whisker marks, he had nothing. On second thought, why would Naruto even have whisker marks in the first place, he thought. Right now, Shikamaru was sweating profusely upon the indication that Naruto and the Kyuubi are somehow linked. Shikamaru was surprised to see that the monster's incident happened the same day of Naruto's birthday, which was strange, considering that the blonde was an orphan, so maybe Naruto's parents were killed by the Kyuubi. A lot of ideas were passing through his mind right now, but not one of them involved Naruto actually being a demon. So the question remains, why would Kurenai say that he is a demon? He thought, well, more like rubbing his temples for not being able to find the answer. Looking at the time, he realized that he just spent over 2 hours in the library and still wasn't even remotely near the answer. Deciding to dwell on it from a different approach, Shikamaru moved to see how the fourth defeated the monster. Suddenly, just like some say that in order to remember something, You need to think of something else. A thought came barging in and Shikamaru remembered of Naruto's fight against Neji at the Chunin tournament. At first, Naruto's chakra color was blue, quite the same as anybody else, which to Shikamaru, proved that he was human. However, during the fight, Naruto's chakra color somehow changed to a red appearance. It was there that Shikamaru cursed his overgrown curiosity for the first time in his life. Sweet Kami, two different chakra sources. Naruto's chakra is blue, while Kyuubi's chakra is red, thought Shikamaru as he imagined a line splitting Naruto's image with being in the left side, Naruto representing the blue chakra and on the right, Kyuubi representing the red chakra. As Shikamaru was dwelling on the discovery, one silver-haired Junin was there reading the latest edition of Ika Ika when he spotted the pineapple head looking at a picture of the Kyuubi with a face peculiar to someone who went to hell and back twice. Sighing, Kakashi concluded that Shikamaru was indeed a genius and thus, the truth would be clear to him. I assume that by the look on your face and the subject you're reading that you know the connection between Naruto and Kyuubi, said Kakashi, making Shikamaru look at him, still looking like shit from such realization. Sweet Kami, is this why Kurenai-sensei called him a demon? Asked Shikamaru, now demanding answers. Relax, I'll explain everything. But first, you are to swear secrecy of this. This is an A-ranked secret, after all. Now, as you already know, the Yondaime was the one who saved Konoha from the fox, however he didn't defeat the demon. The Kyuubi happened to be a creature consisted of pure energy. Therefore, it was safe to assume that it didn't have a corporeal form. Being a master of the lost art of Fuinjutsu, sealing technique, Yondaime created a seal that was able to trap the demon and keep it in place. Nevertheless, the demon's jail couldn't be an inanimate object since the Kyuubi would break free in seconds. Also, it couldn't be sealed inside a grown man, since the guy's chakra coils wouldn't resist, therefore, killing him and once again setting the monster free. The Yondaime's only option was to seal the demon inside someone whose chakra coils wasn't developed yet, as a way for the monster's chakra to be able to mingle without so much as damaging the body, explained Kakashi, just waiting for Shikamaru to conclude the line of thinking. Therefore, Yondaime Hokage sealed inside a newborn baby, thus one named Uzumaki Naruto. Mumbled Shikamaru, still shocked from the news, to which Kakashi just nodded. Needn't I remember you that sharing this information will be your death penalty? I only told you because you already knew some aspects, said Kakashi, to which Shikamaru nodded in acknowledgement, but being the over-curious and not one bit judgmental, Shikamaru turned to ask. So Kurenai was right, then? Naruto is the demon? Asked Shikamaru, before being able to see Kakashi flinch at such notion. Kurenai was moved by sadness from losing Asuma, so it would be only logical that she used him as a scapegoat. However, Naruto is no demon, he never was, never is and never will be. And before you ask why Naruto took the blame for Asuma's death, while his theory is true from a certain point of view, it's safe to say that Naruto isn't a demon. Said Kakashi, interrupting Shikamaru, which was in fact going to ask that. So, what is his theory? Asked Shikamaru, to which Kakashi sighed and wondered when the lazy bum began to show interest all of a sudden. According to him, both him and Kyuubi share one body, therefore he believes that he's Kyuubi just as Kyuubi's him or something like that. After hearing Naruto's theory, Shikamaru managed to see reason to it and understood why he took the blame for his sensei's death to a certain point, but he knew he would have the blonde's word for the rest. After he once again expressed his reason for keeping secrecy and stood up to leave towards his house, when Kakashi stopped him. Whether you think he is a demon or not, it's your call. Naruto has a lot of people that don't like him, one more wouldn't make a difference, said Kakashi and then left the Nara Chunin. Wondering about the blonde, Shikamaru didn't need to think about it. He knew Naruto wasn't a demon. However, he concurred with Naruto on the point of sharing a body with a demon. Training ground number 43. After some time of training, the real Naruto was sweating profusely. Today, He thought he exercised more than a whole year without the use of weights. Sure, until then he didn't have the slave driver kind of sensei practically beating him up inside only for Naruto to keep on going. As he was resting the 5 minutes granted by Kyuubi, who in turn was already healing Naruto's strained muscles for the last training run, Naruto suddenly heard shoutings. Fuden Daitapa, wind style. Great breakthrough, said one of the clones before exhaling a huge gust of wind towards a huge boulder nearby. Fuden K's no Yaba, wind style. Wind sword jutsu, shouted another clone, and out of nowhere a tree in front of him was sliced open. Fuden K's no Hagashi, wind style. Furious wind jutsu, shouted another clone, which then was enveloped by strong wind force peculiar to the technique's name. 3 techniques already learned, not bad. I bet the 4th one will be done by the time I end my last run around the training ground, said Naruto before getting up and proceed the running. So Kyuubi, how is the training so far? Asked Naruto, thinking of throwing small talk while running. Your body mass is rising considerably, however this is just the first day, so in about a week, we'll get ready to learn the Kenjutsu style. Tomorrow, you'll be training taijutsu with the weights, so as to be accustomed to it. As to the jutsus, 4 techniques will do for now. The others will come out eventually. Since the clones already managed 4 techniques, you can now assign more clones to do the other more complex jutsus, said Kyuubi, detailing how the day went when suddenly both of them heard one clone shouting, Fuden Itama no Jutsu, wind style, air bullet jutsu. At Naruto's house, after the last run, Naruto was dead tired for the first time in his life. Quickly dragging Histo his home in order to get Kyuubi's approved dinner, which sadly to Naruto didn't have any ramen involved. Rather the meal consisted of some sushi and vegetables. After the meal, which was surprisingly good by the way, Naruto threw himself on his bed and just let his eyes close slowly. While the body slept, the fox inside was beginning his work. Every time Naruto rested, he would heal the strain in his muscles so that Naruto wouldn't need to wait a while before continuing training again. 1 week later, upon returning to his apartment after a long day training, Naruto was amazed about how much he was able to learn in 1 week by utilizing the Kage Bunshin style of training. Naruto's ninjutsu increased exponentially, since Naruto managed to make the last one called Fuden Suido no Tatsumaki, wind style, tornado tunnel jutsu, so he was able to make all the 12 techniques listed so far, 13 if he was to add the Fuden Rasengan. Now concerning his body structure, he grew up a few inches and was slightly ripped with muscles being quite visible at eye. Taijutsu with weights were a good thing, since in time Naruto managed to do some precise katas. Tomorrow, it would be Kenjutsu time and Naruto was eager to finally be able to use the katana properly. Once again drifting to sleep, Naruto was suddenly awake by the fox, calling his name. Before you go to sleep, I believe you must know that I will be teaching you Kaden ninjutsu theory and some fire techniques as well, said the fox, earning a scowl from Naruto and him mumbling quietly, am I supposed to be sleeping or not? Thought Naruto, to which Kyuubi responded with a smile. Of course you'll be sleeping, imbecile meatbag. The only difference would be I teaching your brain, Kaden ninjutsu, so that tomorrow, while you learn Kenjutsu, your clones will be performing Kaden techniques, said the fox, to which Naruto nodded and quickly closed his eyes sleeping. Okay, then, now that he's asleep, let's implant some memories about the jutsus I'd about to teach him. Kyuubi was impressed to see that Naruto has some strong lungs, which could gather lots of air for combustion, therefore, being able to learn the most difficult and most dangerous techniques. Meanwhile with Shikamaru, along the week, Shikamaru thought a lot about the blonde Jinchuriki. During the week, Team 10 did a couple of C-rank missions, since they didn't have Asuma with them anymore. During this time, Shikamaru managed to reach a conclusion about the blonde. While he knew Naruto wasn't a demon, he knew that the fox demon was residing inside of him. Thinking of the blonde's life with a demon trapped inside his body, Shikamaru wondered how Naruto remained sane. He knew that the blonde was an orphan and being the host of a demon, Naruto could very well turn up to be a demon. However, in all his life, Shikamaru just couldn't imagine Naruto doing something akin to a demon. Quite on the contrary, the blonde always wanted to protect everyone and become the Hokage. Nevertheless, he remembered what Kakashi said about a lot of people hating Naruto because of this and wondered if people blamed him for what the fox did back then. Right now, Shikamaru was relaxing at his household's garden and staring at the clouds. Suddenly, a shadow appeared behind him. Nara Shikako was in a lot of ways an older Shikamaru, however the look on his face right now was dead serious and Shikamaru rarely saw that look. "Shika, we need to talk," said Shikako, before kneeling down next to his son. "Shikamaru, Kakashi-san told me that you unraveled one of Konoha's most prized secrets," said Shikako, to which Shikamaru snorted since he knew what his father wanted to talk about. "It took me quite some time, but I managed to know. What I don't know, though, is why all of you lied to me about the Kyuubi being defeated," asked Shikamaru strangely casual. The Nara clan never raised a finger towards Naruto, however they had to comply with the Sandame's law. When the Kyuubi was trapped inside Naruto-kun, the Sandame Hokage was afraid that people would try harming Naruto, on the hopes of hurting the demon. So, he issued a law stating death penalty for those who regarded Naruto as being a demon. However, while no one could regard him as such, the people of Konoha simply treated him like trash, beating him, cursing at him. And before you ask, none of the Nara clan ever raised a finger at the boy. However, we didn't do anything towards helping the boy either. The Kyuubi killed a lot of people: sons, husbands, wives, parents. In the end, Naruto ended up being the village's scapegoat. I have to say, though, for him to do what he did at Asuma's funeral, took a lot of guts out of him. I oftentimes wondered why the Yondaime chose Naruto to become the vessel of such demon, but now after seeing his resolve, I couldn't think of anyone else to fit such role better than him, said Shikako, confusing Shikamaru at the last part. Why you say that? Asked the Nara Chunin. After so many injustices, so much hardship in his life, he still has the guts to acknowledge his situation and assume all responsibility for what happened almost 16 years ago. The Yondaime was pure genius, said Shikako, although consciously missing the fact that he was talking about father and son, but that was an ever bigger secret than the Kyuubis. After hearing his father, Shikamaru smiled at the prospect of actually getting to know the real Naruto, not the hyperactive knucklehead that the blonde appeared to be. Training ground number 43. Damn it, Naruto, use your muscles, said the fox, after seeing Naruto attacking with the sword. For some time now, Naruto started training his kenjutsu style and he was finding it hard to control his arm muscles while fighting. The secret of the technique was to use the muscles when attacking or defending, empowering the strikes, and when he was analyzing the opponent, that was the time for muscle relaxation. Quit screaming, damn fox. I can hear you without the shouting, said Naruto before kneeling on the ground, requesting for rest, to which the fox complied and he turned to see the clones struggling to learn Kaden ninjutsu. So far, the clones managed to learn the Kaden Gukaku no Jutsu, fire style, Grand Fireball Jutsu Kaden Makai no Kan, fire style, Hell Blaze Jutsu, and Kaden Kan no Doki, fire style, Fire's Wrath Jutsu. Naruto was impressed to see that the last ones the clone learned was the fox's creations. However, Naruto wasn't surprised, seeing that the kitsune lived through thousands and thousands of years, thus learning a lot of things throughout his existence. Okay, now time is over, your muscles are good to go. However, I'll be teaching you my third jutsu. It's called Kaden Endo no Tsurugi, fire style, flame sword jutsu. It consists of channeling Kaden chakra at the blade, transforming it into a fire-type katana, similar in a way to applying Fudan chakra and making the blade sharper. With this technique, no one will try to attack you and will be extra cautious to defend as well, said the fox, to which Naruto nodded and started focusing the necessary amount of the fox's chakra and start channeling Kaden chakra. How do you know the metal won't melt? Asked the blonde, to which the fox answered like it was plainly obvious. I know a good sword when I see one, said the kitsune, making Naruto sweat drop at possibly melting his sword, thus having to buy another one. After channeling the chakra, Naruto was expecting the metal to suddenly turn into liquid, however, much to his amazement, the sword began to catch on fire. What was even more amazing was the fact that he wasn't being affected by the heat. After seeing this, Kyuubi grinned, saying that the flames would only hurt a regular Kaden user, but Naruto was sharing a body with the Fire Lord of the Underworld. Now let's proceed with the physical training. You're getting stronger, but you're in no way near the strength necessary to wield the Furasere, free spirit, said the fox, to which Naruto mumbled something about stupid slave driver fox and began to do his sets of push-ups and sit-ups, followed by running around the training field and jumping from tree through tree. While the real Naruto was working out, a single person was just walking out of her favorite training ground. Few actually knew, but the second part of the Chunin exam was held at the Forest of Death simply because Mitarashi Anko was the proctor of such event. The reason as to why she liked the place was the peace and quiet that came along with it, plus a few animals to kill when she was feeling like a little blood. However, as she jumped from the gate, she sensed a lot of chakra being spent near where she was standing, presumably someone training in training ground number 43. When she arrived at the training ground, her jaw was instantly set to the ground. In front of her were what appeared to be hundreds blondes training Kaden ninjutsu and apparently one doing physical workout. Actually, the sight before her made Anko drool a little bit at seeing the one doing push-ups and sit-ups. Damn, he's hot. Doesn't hurt to pay a little visit. Let's see who this guy is, thought Anko as she proceeded to the one working out, not even minding the clones stopping their training to look at the newcomer. The real Naruto suddenly received a message from one of the clones that vanished. He was furious that he was going to be perturbed in here, where he thought no one would ever come here except for the Chunin exams. Suddenly, a thought registered and Naruto knew the only one crazy enough to consider this side of the village a little playground. Mitarashi Anko was the most sadist person he ever met, and the fact that the fox liked the girl didn't help one bit. There were times when Naruto would dream that he and Anko was inside the training ground number 44, aka Forest of Death, doing naughty stuff together, and only now he knew that it was the damn fox delaying images inside his head, just for his amusement. Anko, for her part, as she approached the person, was beginning to recognize the face features. However, the one she knew that contained whisker marks wasn't supposed to be this big as of yet. Even though 3 years have passed ever since she laid eyes on the obnoxious brat, it just wasn't possible for him to grow so much. As she arrived near him, she realized she was drooling for a 15-year-old. However, she was surprised to see the blonde getting up and surpassing her height by a good 6 inches. Anko is 5 feet 4, so Naruto is 6 feet 0. Is there something you wish to discuss, Anko-san? Asked Naruto, not demonstrating his rather irritation at having this conversation instead of training. I was just in the neighborhood. Sensed your chakra and came to check. Do you have a problem with me here? What's with the training? Never seen one train like this before, asked Anko, and while she was waiting for an answer, she was seizing the boy now overgrown man. Truth be told, she was rather mad for the blonde who didn't even say hello to her, but she guessed that she interrupted something, so that must have been it. She remembered what Yugo shared with her some time ago about the blonde taking responsibility for Asuma-san's death to Akatsuki, and safe to say, Anko wanted a few answers from the source. However, she was taken aback when Naruto turned to answer rather rude. I chose this area, so that no one would bother me, just like you have your own. Now, as to the training, I happen to have quite a lot of chakra to spend, said Naruto, to which Anko scowled at him. Truth be told, she liked the tranquility at the Forest of Death, so like the blonde, she would be furious if someone interrupted her. however being accused of doing the opposite, she was pissed to say the least. Okay, I get it, so you're saying I got in the way of your train. Oh, I guess I did it, didn't I? My bad, said Anko, after she looked around and noticed that hundreds of Naruto were looking at her. Seeing that Naruto wasn't training anymore, he dismissed the clones one by one until all their memory came to him and he sent near the tree he was in. Of course, while he was looking at the snake mistress, Kyuubi was behaving like an animal in heat, making Naruto be rather uncomfortable. Would you stop that, you damn fox? She's human and you're a goddamn fox, thought Naruto out loud, to which the fox responded. I'll stop as soon as you get in bed with her. Besides, I can take the shape of a man and start doing stuff to her that you even began to dream about, mumbled the fox, to which Naruto scowled and started paying attention at the real world. If you want to know about my training, just know that what the Cage Bunshin learns, the real one will receive his memory after he is dispelled, said Naruto, to which Anko said by his side. Oh yes, Kakashi's invention. Say, why you are sweating so much, not that I'm complaining about it, said Anko, to which Naruto appeared inside his mindscape and blamed the fox for the images inside his head. It only got worse, though, when Kyuubi advised for Naruto to tell her the truth. To say Naruto was uncomfortable now, it would be an understatement. He was having trouble to control such lust, and if he told Anko that the fox has the hots for her, he knew she would jump at his neck instantly. What the hell? At least this will go away. Mind you readers that he isn't gay, he just hates perverts. Anko-san, called Naruto, as his breathing was becoming agitated from the huge lust and the sudden response from his hormones because of the pictures inside his head. Anko for her part was confused on what was going on. First Naruto starts sweating and now she could smell the lust leaking out of his body, thus affecting her as well. Why, Naruto-san? Asked Anko, almost on the verge of exploding, to which Naruto turned to explain their current situation. Would you believe it, I told you that this lust you're feeling, it all belongs to the fox inside? Asked Naruto, now having trouble breathing. Anko, after hearing that, gritted her teeth from the lust pressure. Of course no human would be this horny, and certainly not Naruto, who openly cursed the perverted Sannin from peeping at the women. Why is the fox doing this? Asked Anko, now believing more than anything. Veer, since we met you, he has been doing this from time to time. I don't know what to do to control such urge, said Naruto, before suddenly he heard moaning coming from Anko, worsening the situation even more if that was possible. Anko for her part was impressed with the boy's resolve against becoming a pervert. Being able to control this urge for 3 whole years and not jump at nearly any female in front of him was a feat on its own. However, she didn't have that kind of control, and it was unlikely that she would get rid of this feeling anytime soon, so she'd help the blonde with this. Naruto-kun, I doubt that we could control this urge. It's best to just go along with the flow, said Anko before moaning louder. Naruto for his part, because of his increased sense of smell, could sense Anko's pheromones reaching volcano temperatures. However, after a whole 3 years of this, only a gay wouldn't be fazed about it. Suddenly Naruto saw Anko taking off her coat and come forward, becoming face to face with the blonde, then smashing her lips with his own. While the kiss was going on, Naruto was going nuts inside. He thought that with this, the situation would be solved, but now Kyuubi was out of control and he feared for Anko's life. Right now, Anko was on top of him, madly kissing him while using her hands to massage his arms and chest. Suddenly, Anko felt something beginning to grow downstairs, and instantly, her lust was increased. Instantly, with one free hand, she began massaging Naruto's with intense. Aren't we excited? What would you like to do with this firm one here? Asked Anko, not even waiting for Naruto to answer, before kissing him once again and then take off her fishnet clothes that happened to be the only piece of clothing separating Naruto from her S. After Naruto saw the S, all sense of control he had until now vanished literally. Therefore, he attacked Anko's S with his mouth, sucking them dry, making Anko cry in pleasure. Truth be told, she was having hard times controlling her orgasm after Naruto's stunt. Suddenly, when Naruto's free hand started to massage her downstairs, she convulsed. Anko Mitarashi was what could say a proud woman, and thus losing to someone is not something she enjoys. Therefore, after taking the time to feel the bliss that came with the orgasm, Anko woke up, yanked Naruto's pants off with force and started sucking Naruto's with intensity. Meanwhile, the fox inside of Naruto was smiling deviously at his successful plan. He knew that his host had a thing against perverts, however that didn't mean he couldn't have. Therefore, he began sending images of Anko to his mind and increases the body temperature in hopes of breaking the boy's control. Back to Anko and Naruto. Naruto was losing control of his orgasm while Anko was sucking every inch of his firm member. He had to hand to the girl, not only a good kunoichi, but also quite skilled at the arts. Anko, for her part, was particularly enjoying the taste of his inside her mouth. However, she was trapped by a sudden urge to feel his inside of her. Therefore, while on top of him, Anko took of the rest of her clothes and just put his member inside of her. To say Anko was enjoying, it would be an understatement. After each thrust, Anko was becoming more and more aroused. And when she looked at Naruto's face, she bends her body close to his face in order to smash her lips with his own as well as keeping the penetration. Naruto for his part was quite impressed to see that the snake mistress was enjoying his strong thrusts inside of her. He couldn't control the power of the thrusts inside her and was afraid that he would hurt her, but the stronger the thrusts were, the louder was her moaning for more. Therefore, when he moved forward to changing position, Anko didn't even hesitate and complied. Bending in all fours, Anko suddenly screamed in pleasure when Naruto putted his in with intensity. Anko happened to enjoy this position, since Naruto could pull her hair back and that was like a fetish to her. True to her fantasy, Naruto started pulling her hair while thrusting it inside with force. Oh god. That's it, Naruto-kun. Keep it up. I need more. Screamed Anko, already on the process of convulsion, to which Naruto responded by giving one deep thrust, reaching Anko's inner walls. After a few movements, Naruto and Anko were going at it with both of them almost on the verge of exploding. Anko had already came with Naruto's inside of her, therefore her inner walls ended up squeezing his, making him moan even louder in ecstasy. When it was Naruto's turn to have an orgasm, Anko took his and sucked it once again, making Naruto lose all sorts of control and simply release the fluid inside her throat. A few minutes later, both of them, now fully dressed, sit side by side. Naruto was explaining to Anko that he and the fox shared the same body and that together they were one. Being that said, Anko understood his decision to take the blame for what happened, but he thought less of trying to convince him not to think like that, simply because he didn't even show that he regretted such decision. So, what are you going to do now? After what you've done, you can't stay here and wait for them to sudden praise you or something. Asked Anko, to which Naruto nodded. I was never in need of recognition from them in the first place, and you're right, I can't stay here, but not because this village would hunt me down or something like that. The longer I stay here, the more people will be hurt by Akatsuki just so that they can get to me. So, I made a secret request to Hokage-sama to be instated as A, said Naruto and whispered the name of the position close to Anko's ear so that no one would hear. Anko for her part, after hearing it, understood his idea. Becoming a hunter nin would take him away from the village, therefore not endangering anyone. Akatsuki would search for him elsewhere, but they won't find him, simply because of a mask and a simple henge, changing the hair color. Well, Naruto, about what happened between us. Although that was the best I've ever had, it doesn't mean that we have feelings for each other. I, for one, didn't even know if you were dead or still alive since you disappeared for 3 years, and I bet you have feelings for that Sakura girl, right? Asked Anko, to which Naruto simply nodded in the negative. Sakura is nothing more than a teammate to me. My supposed crush for her was more of my sudden drive for attention in the past. But while I don't have feelings for anyone at the moment, I can say that I don't consider you more than a potential friend. Like me, you also suffered hardships in life, and right now, you know a secret of mine that only the Hokage, Jiraiya and Kakashi know of, therefore ask for secrecy in this, said Naruto, to which Anko smiled, appreciating the honesty and getting up. In all honesty, that happened simply because of the uncontrollable lust that surrounded the area, therefore while usually girls would be upset from the rejection, Anko was one to hate falsity, so she began respecting the blonde in front of her even more for his honesty. Good luck on your journey, Naruto. When you return, make sure to tell me about the trip, and don't worry, your secret is safe with me, said Anko, to which Naruto smiled and nodded. Thanks. I'll be sure to send you a few heads if you want to, said Naruto, to which Anko smiled genuinely for the first time in her life. No thanks, I enjoy a little bit of blood, but not actual human flesh. I'll be hearing good things from you, Naruto. Just don't be greedy. I happen to know a few hunter nins that happened to be killed because they tried to capture Orochimaru or Itachi, said Anko, earning a nod from Naruto. Those will have to wait for the moment. I'm beginning with C-ranked missing nins for a while. After a while, I'll go to the B-ranked, therefore it's safe to say that S-ranked criminals will be the last of the list. I appreciate for the concern, though, said Naruto, earning a nod from Anko, who in turn smiled deviously out of sudden. And maybe we can have another go, when you and the fox are in need of a woman's touch, said Anko before walking away, leaving Naruto sitting there with a side expression on his face while Kyuubi smiled deeply inside his mindscape. Yep, indeed the most sadistic person alive, thought Naruto, to which the Kyuubi retorted, indeed she is, but that doesn't mean you didn't enjoy it, said the fox, making Naruto sigh. Stating the obvious. It has been almost a week after the whole interaction with Anko happened, and now Naruto was seen slashing imaginary opponents with his now blazed katana. At first, he thought that the heat generated from the sword would hurt him rather profusely. However, Kyuubi assured him that when Naruto uses its chakra, the fire won't consume his body, simply because of how Kyuubi's control over the fire element is. Suffice to say, Naruto was impressed at know that Kyuubi was the true Lord of Fire. Furthermore, Naruto was quickly learning the Huka Yakushin, fire-kenjutsu style, and thus being able to wield the Furasere, free spirit, with ease now. After all, he not only got accustomed to the weights on his body but the katana's weight as well. Naruto, now that your kenjutsu training is done, we'll improve your ninjutsu part. I know that you already learned all the Fuden jutsus and all of the Kaden jutsus that I told you so far. But since you're going to be pretty much alone out there, you'll need to save as much chakra as you could. Therefore, chakra control exercise is vital. Now, summon 300 clones and divided them into 2 groups. One will practice tree walking and the other will go to the lake for water walking practice. You, on the other hand, will do a new exercise, said the fox, to which Naruto nodded and turned to summon the 2 groups. After he divided them and set each group for their specific tasks, he turned to listen to the exercise that the fox would relate to him. Now, you'll be practicing meditation. The theory is simple. By closing your eyes and focus on your inside, you can manage to feel your chakra flowing through your chakra coils. The objective of this exercise is to be able to feel how much chakra you're using while on a technique or just channeling chakra to a specific part of your body. After this exercise, there is 2 high-level Kaden jutsus that I will teach you. First one is a human one called Kaden Karyu Enden, fire style, Dragon Fire Missile Jutsu, and the other one is one of mine that I called Kaden Makai no Kyorin, fire style, Hell's Fury Jutsu, said Kyuubi, to which Naruto sit and closed his eyes, true to Kyuubi's teachings so far. Along the month period, Naruto was rather impressed by seeing this teacher side of the fox. While he was tough, actually more inclined to a slave driver, Naruto was able to learn a lot from the kitsune, thus shortening the time needed for him to be able to take care of himself outside of Konoha. While he closed his eyes, he began what the fox said about channeling chakra through specific parts of his body, thus trying to feel such a flow. After a while, Naruto had already tried every parts of his body in efforts of feeling the chakra flowing inside of him, but he wasn't lucky at all. So far, he couldn't see if he was channeling more or less of the chakra necessary, and that was frustrating. Kyuubi once told him that this exercise was more to test his patience while channeling chakra, since it would get him to understand things more clearly, without being driven by negative emotions. With Anko walking without a care in the world, among the streets of Konoha, Anko was heading towards her favorite restaurant in Konoha, the Dango store. Along the way, she wondered how she would have survived without being able to taste such pleasure in life. While she was walking, however, she noticed someone familiar coming from the opposite side of her and sighed at the person's sad expression on her face. Anko kind of sympathized with Kurenai, not because she lost someone dear to her, but simply from pain in general. Kurenai was somewhat of a friend to Anko, since she was the few amongst the ones from their generation that never mistreated Anko because of what Orochimaru did to Konoha. Deciding that a little comfort was in need, Anko approached the red-eyed Junin with a smile on her face. "Ohio, Kurenai," shouted Anko, greeting to which the woman smiled and nodded in response. After a while of greetings, Anko offered an invitation to eat some dango, to which Kurenai accepted. So right now, both of them, having already ordered their respective plates, settled down in a table. Kurenai was still looking down, clearly mourning over her lover's death, while Anko was trying to come up with something for conversation purposes. "So, how is your team?" asked Anko, clearly throwing conversation away, and even more clearly it was that Kurenai wasn't on the mood to be talking about Team 8. "Sorry Anko, since it happened, I haven't seen them yet. Hokage-sama assigned a temporary replacement for me, so they are out on missions, other than that I don't know much," said Kurenai, without even bothering to look at Anko's face. However, as Anko was about to ask another question, Nara Shikamaru entered the place and spotted the two kunoichis and the look on Kurenai's face at the death of his sensei. Truth be told, Shikamaru still wasn't accustomed to not smelling the intoxicating smoke that usually came out of Asuma's death sticks, but he at least was in terms with what happened and was on the verge of moving on, but seeing Kurenai's saddened face, proved to him that in her case, it would take longer to heal. "Ohio, Anko-san, Kurenai-sensei," said Shikamaru, not with the pretension of staying any longer than he has to, since he felt like interrupting their conversation and it would be much troublesome to do a thing like that. "Hello there, Shikamaru. Join us if you want. I believe Kurenai here would appreciate that you stay at least for a little while," said Anko, most likely begging for him to stay and bring up a topic that was worthy, also one that wouldn't increase Kurenai's sadness even further. "Say, I was looking for Naruto, I wonder if any of you know where he is?" asked Shikamaru, making Anko sweat profusely and suddenly diminish the guy's intelligence rate. Here she was expecting him to at least bring up a harmless conversation, and instead the man asks for the man who, according to Kurenai, was the one responsible for Asuma getting killed. True to her worries, Kurenai clenched her fists at the sudden name and would attack Shikamaru had his shadow wouldn't appear and hold the woman's punch. After seeing what she would have done, Kurenai withdrew her arm and apologized to the Chunin. "Sorry Shikamaru, I didn't mean to lash out on you as just," said Kurenai, to which Shikamaru filled in the gaps for her. "Every time you hear Naruto's name, you get angry. There is no need for apologies Kurenai-sensei," said Shikamaru, to which Kurenai nodded and looked down again. "It was his fault that Asuma is dead. If he wasn't here, Akatsuki wouldn't come here searching for him," said Kurenai, almost like expecting to be contradicted by any of the two, but strangely no one said a word, making the red-eyed kunoichi look at both shinobis on the table. First, she noticed that Shikamaru was sad as well, but she knew that the death of Asuma was the only reason, However, Anko was with her eyes closed, presumably thinking. True to Kurenai's wonderings, Anko was indeed thinking, and the reason was Kurenai's comment regarding Naruto's staying here in the village. She wondered if Kurenai was saying that simply because of Asuma's death, or that Kurenai really believed that Naruto staying in the village would only bring misfortune to the village in the future. Suddenly, she remembered the blonde saying something to her that. Flashback on. So, what are you going to do now? After what you've done, you can't stay here and wait for them to sudden praise you or something? Asked Anko, to which Naruto nodded. I was never in need of recognition from them in the first place, and you're right, I can't stay here, but not because this village would hunt me down or something like that. The longer I stay here, the more people will be hurt by Akatsuki just so that they can get to me. Flashback off. Naruto, no matter how much suffering you've been through in your life, no matter how much adversity you overcame, still you have to bear the burden of forever being Konoha's scapegoat. Such is the life of a Jinchuriki such as yours. If I were to choose, I'd gladly committed suicide a long time ago. My congrats to your will for living, and I hope that the villagers and Kurenai will eventually stop blaming you for what happened, thought Anko as she looked at Kurenai one more time, before saying all that she needed to say. Do not worry anymore, Kurenai, you'll never see his face ever again, said Anko before lifting from her chair and leaving Kurenai and Shikamaru looking at her trench coat. Shikamaru for his part was intrigued by what Anko said. He knew that Naruto wouldn't abandon the village, simply because he wouldn't stand as low as the Uchiha traitor. However, why would no one ever see his face again? A mask perhaps? Thought Shikamaru, wondering that Naruto's face would be forever hidden by him using a mask. So that meant that either he entered the Anbu program or he was listed as a hunter nin. Knowing that such doubt wouldn't solve the mystery that is Uzumaki Naruto, Shikamaru turned to address Kurenai that he was supposed to meet his father, to which Kurenai nodded and bid him goodbye. After Shikamaru left, Kurenai got to think about what Anko said for a moment. Since her interaction with Naruto at the funeral, Kurenai was getting more and more convinced that the blonde would be better off gone from Konoha even before he was born. Of course, she knew, deep inside, that she began to think about him as being the one to blame, because of Asuma getting killed. Kurenai never viewed the boy as being a demon. Actually, she even found her student Hinata's crush on Naruto to be actually cute. However, at the funeral, Kurenai was in turmoil over Asuma dying, so yet again Naruto was used as her scapegoat for her frustrations. Kurenai remembered all of the interactions that she so far had with the boy. Out of few times she got in contact with him, however,